Now we're heading into the real macro part, and the next two chapters are about measuring things. If we want to say the economy is better off or worse off, or it's the greatest economy of all time, or, the economy sucked when, so we have to have a way to measure that. We have to have an argument other than it just feels that way. So we have a whole bunch of ways of measuring the economy. The most basic of this is something called GDP, gross domestic product. And that's our topic. Macroeconomics. Really everything we've done up to this point is kind of generic economics. And this chapter is where we split off from what you would learn in a 102 class and give you what you need to learn in a macroeconomics class. So what topics do we need to talk about? Well, number one, and these are not in order of importance, these are just in the order that the author of your book decided to put them in there. The business cycle. Over time, our economy goes up and down. And if you look over to the right here, that's a graph, and we'll see the whole graph in a little while. But you can see from that graph that our economy has periods where it's going up and periods where it's going down. We call that up and down movement the business cycle. When the economy is going up, we call that an expansion. When it's going down, it might be a recession. It's possible for the economy to go down and not have it to be a recession. We have these contractions, might be a recession, but the business cycle. Number two, we want to talk about growth. Over time, the U.S. economy has grown. The U.S. economy is much bigger today than it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. All right? And we call that economic growth. And we need to talk about why it happens, how it happens, the good and the bad of it. Sometimes people don't have jobs. Sometimes people do. The unemployment in the United States was lowest in recent memory during World War II. And it had periods in the 50s and 60s where it was really, really low, lower than it has been the past few years. There's also been periods where unemployment's been really, really high. The Great Depression, the coronavirus time, a couple of bad recessions that occurred. All right? So how do we have unemployment? Why do we have unemployment? What does that mean to us? And then inflation. Inflation is when we have a persistent increase in prices over a long period of time. And we need to talk about that. If the price of gas goes up today and down tomorrow, that's not inflation. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that what costs $1 today cost 50 cents 25 years ago, cost 10 cents 40 years ago. Okay? That's inflation. All right. So the first trick to all this is we need to be able to measure things. Measure what's going on in the economy. And so we have a number of basic measures of what goes on in the economy that you're going to learn. And the first of these basic measures is something called gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is a way to try to measure economic activity. See that word? Well, let's look at all three words. Gross means the total of everything. Domestic means it's happening inside our country. So GDP is about what happens inside our country. And then product tells us it's something about being produced. It can also backwards be income, because to produce something, businesses have to pay people to produce it and pay people who grow stuff or mine stuff or whatever. And so that process of production is also a process that's creating income. All right? So this basic measure we have is called gross domestic product. And the definition is here. And this is one of those things that, you'll be drifting off to sleep some night and you'll jerk up and you go, GDP is the market value of all. GDP is the market value of all final goods and services produced in a country during a period of time. GDP is the market value of all final goods and services produced in a country during a period of time. GDP is the market value of all final goods and services produced in a country during a period of time. GDP is the market value of all final goods and services produced in a country during a period of time. GDP is the market value of all final goods and services produced in a country during a period of time. Now, clearly, there's three parts of this that we need to separate out. So again, we're talking about all the goods and services that are produced in our country. Everything from farming to cars to airplanes to haircuts and banks. Everything that goes on in our country that's a good or a service that's sold, and we'll talk about that in a second. So market value, final, yeah, got it? GDP is the market value of all final goods and services produced in a country during a period of time. And usually that period of time is either a quarter, and I don't mean 25 cents, I mean 3 months. So in the U.S., we calculate GDP by the quarter. So every 3 months that we come out with a new GDP number, and then GDP is calculated annually. So we have an annual GDP number, a total for the year, and then we have totals for each quarter. Okay, market value. So the first thing we underlined there was market value. For us to calculate GDP, what we do is we say, okay, Chevy, you sold 10,000 Camaros at $28,000 a piece. That's $2.8 million, or whatever it is. Okay? We have to take the thing that was produced, we multiply it times the price that it was sold at. So you grew 100 bushels of wheat, you sold them at $4 a piece, $400. Okay? Things that don't have prices don't have a calculatable market value and therefore aren't part of GDP. Okay? So if you grow some carrots in your backyard and your neighbor grows some squash in their backyard and you trade some of your carrots for some of their squash, not in GDP. Okay? If each of you go to a farmer's market, you with your carrots and them with their squash, and they buy your carrots and you buy their squash, now it counts in GDP. Okay? But we don't count things that didn't exchange for a known price. All right? Number 2, illegal activity. Now, partly you can say, hey, drugs have prices, and don't use them, so I wouldn't know, but we're just assuming from what we learned on television, watching crime shows, that drugs have prices. Most of what we get into GDP is reported on tax returns. Okay? That's how we find out what's in GDP. There's a lot of tax information that's going to the government, and that's where the basic data comes from. There's other things they do, but taxes. Okay? Your average Mexican drug cartel builds submarines for a reason, and they're not reporting their income on their they're not filling out 1040s, and they're not giving the drug dealers W-2s to file their income tax, right? All that illegal activity doesn't go through a regular market. It doesn't have a regular price. We're not going to count that in GDP. So only those things that go through the market. Got it? Okay. Final goods. Here's the deal. To make a GDP that actually works, to measure things that actually work, we want to count everything just one time. So if we dig up some iron ore, and we turn that iron ore into steel, and we turn that steel into a car bumper, and then we put that car bumper on a car, and we do all of that in 2019. If we add up all 4 parts, if we put the iron ore in GDP, and then put the steel in GDP, and then put the bumper in GDP, and then put the car in GDP, I've counted the iron ore 4 times, the steel 3 times, the bumper twice, and the car once. Now, if I add another step in there where the iron ore gets turned into pig iron, which then gets turned, now I'm covering things 5 times. It's not right. I really want to know the actual value of what was produced, and that means I need to count everything that was produced once. So how do I do that? Well, the iron ore is in the steel's in the bumper's in the car. If I count the car, I have counted everything exactly and precisely once. I've done what I needed to do. I'm counting everything one time. Okay? Now, let's make this more complicated. So again, I want to count everything, and the way I do that, one time, the way I do that is to count it in its final form. So the car is obviously the final form of this process. We're going to count the car. Now, complicate. Okay? Where's Avril Lavigne when we need her? It's complicated. What happens if in 2019 I dig up the iron ore, I make the steel, and I make the bumper, but I don't put the bumper into a car until 2020? Ew. Well, in 2019, the bumper is the final form, isn't it? The last thing that was produced in 2019 is the bumper. So into GDP in 2019 goes the bumper. Now, 2020, we stick that bumper on a car, a brand new car we just built. We have to take that car and do what? We already counted the bumper. So we have to take the price of the car, subtract out the bumper that we already included, and in 2020, we're going to put in the car minus the bumper. All right? Am I making sense here? I need to count everything just once. Just once. Okay? Now, does it matter where it was made? And the answer to that is yes, because the middle word of GDP is domestic. So if that bumper is built in Mexico, and in 2019 it's finished in Mexico, it no count in GDP. Right? 2020, it comes to the United States and goes into a car, and we sell the car. Now, what was the real production in the United States that year? That bumper was not produced in the U.S. that year. Probably still shouldn't count. And we didn't count it last year because it was in Mexico. Okay? We only want to count production that happens inside the United States. Now, there's more complexity to this, and it's just not a straight line that it's not good, and we'll get back to that. Okay? In fact, we won't get back to that. We'll do that right now. We do what's called the value-added approach. And what that means is we actually don't just count the bumper. We count the iron ore, and then we count the steel minus the iron ore. Right? It was added. Value was added. We converted that iron ore into steel. So we're going to count the iron ore. We're going to count the steel minus the iron ore. We're going to count the bumper minus the steel. So if adding that bumper onto the car increases the value of the car, the increase in the value of that car should count. Value added. Okay? This car is worth more than its parts cost to make. So there's value added in putting those parts together and building the car. All right? Exciting? Yeah, it's exciting. Value added. All right, given time period. We only want to count things that are made now. So if you go to the used car lot and you buy a 2015 whatever piece of junk that is, that doesn't count in GDP. Because it counted in GDP in 2015. We're going to count everything one time in the year it was made. So that car was built in 2015. When we resell it in 2020, we're not counting it because we already counted it. We count everything, one time. One time. We count everything one time. Now, let's complicate this for a second. You take that car that you bought, that's this piece of junk that you bought on the used car lot, and you do this to it. Paint it, fix up the engine, put a 10 million watt stereo system in it, lower it, put some new suspension on it, put some different tires on it. Well, all of that is new, right? The paint job is new, the tires are new, the wheels are new, the rims are new, the engine parts are new. Everything that's new, the new upholstery, the new sound system, all of the new stuff counts. The fact that we bought this used car, that car itself doesn't count. But all the work we do to it, so that our friends will look at us like we're stupid and our neighbors will hate us, all of that counts in GDP. Okay? Fun?